Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of June of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. These days he made lots of very interesting statements about the situation with his legitimacy. Zelensky told Sky News that he should remain the head of the country until the war is over. According to him, he may not be an ideal leader, but he has the most experience now. He added that the stability and controllability are important in a war, which means changing the leadership is not the best step. The day before, the head of the presidential office, Yermak, said that Zelensky should run for a second term, calling him the best president in the history of Ukraine. So Zelensky believes that he is the only person who can lead this war to a victory or to results in Ukrainian favor. So that is why he is going to stay as a president until the end of the war. But the problem is that this war will never end until Zelensky is the president of Ukraine. So this is the problem, which means that this war can take years, months, or probably tens of years before this war finishes. Which means that the Ukrainians, just regular Ukrainians, currently has no options to change their lives in better way or even in worse way, but to change it. Everything is going to happen, everything is going to continue developing, as we can see right now. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of very interesting updates, and the Russians, another day in a row, managed to improve their positions along the entire line of combat contact significantly. And first let's talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians during the previous 48 hours carry out several counterattacks with the purpose to restore control over the settlement of Dyliivka that was recaptured by the Ukrainians recently. And Ukrainian sources published this video. In this video we can see how Russians were trying to gather themselves around the village of Dyliivka with the purpose to attack the settlement from many directions, but the Ukrainians sent a lot of drones in this area that recorded positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, and according to this video most of the Russian attacks in the direction of Dyliivka were repelled by the Ukrainians. Furthermore, this situation in this area was confirmed today by pro-Russian resources. Several very reliable pro-Russian resources, for the first time since the beginning of Ukrainian counter-offensive, confirmed that Ukrainians, as a result of their counter-attacks, managed to restore control over some positions. The Ukrainians restored control over this part of the road NO7 and managed to get very close to the settlement of Yablunovka. The Ukrainians, according to information we have, managed to reinforce their positions in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Varachina and to stabilize the situation around the settlement with the purpose not to allow the Russians to move further in the southern direction. And as we discussed in the previous videos, the Ukrainians managed to reinforce their positions and to restore control over the settlement of Dyliivka. The source reported that Ukrainians continue their attacks, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to increase their pressure on the village by the name of Kondrashevka, and the Ukrainians are trying to attack in the direction of the settlement of Alexeyevka. As for the Russian side, currently the Russians are focused just on one direction, and we are talking about the settlement of Yunakivka. Today, several very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense in the central part of the settlement, and the Russians entered the final part of the village of Yunakivka, the southern part, which means that most likely during the next several days the Russians will be able to finish the battle for this territory, and this will allow the Russians to begin their counter-offensive operation along the entire first defense belt along those positions that Ukrainians managed to restore control over. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction, and first let's talk about the northern Kupiansk area. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Golubovka. So we are talking about this small settlement that is located along the river Voskol. This information, which is most important, was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources and by neutral mappers. So according to this report, the Russians secured this territory, and the Russians are going to move further along the river Voskol in the direction of the northern part of the city of Kupiansk itself. I would like to remind you that during the May of 2025 and June of 2025, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians managed to secure the village of Kondrashevka, the village of Redkovka, and the Russians managed to secure the village of Mirova. So now we see that if all these updates are correct and if all these updates is truth, this means that the Russians are going to attack further in the southern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over everything that is located inside of this pocket. We're talking about this dense network of fortifications and this huge forest, and this is going to be the biggest foothold ever in the northern part of the city of Kupiansk, which will allow the Russians to continue concentration of their forces and to cut partially the supply and support of Ukrainians on the eastern bank of the river Oskol, which will at the end force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction or the Lyman area. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the line of combat contact. Just yesterday, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and several pro-Russian resources published this video, where we can see how Russian soldiers raised their flags in the most northern part of the settlement. Based on this video and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, most of the mappers adjusted their maps exactly in this area. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the way to the village of Glushenkova, and the Russians managed to improve their positions around the village of Grekovka. Now the Russians are trying to outflank this company stronghold, which is located to the northwest of the settlement, with the purpose, of course, at the end to establish control over this territory. So now we see that the Russians are going to continue their offensive operation with the purpose to improve their positions to the north of the village of Redkadub, to create additional gap, additional space, additional buffer zone before they begin their offensive operation in the direction of the city by the name of Lyman. So the Russians are just trying to stay and to be on the safe side. If they begin offensive in the direction of Lyman, they don't want to get strike in their back while moving in the southern direction. So that is why they need to create this buffer. Now let's move further. As for the Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates from this area. And the most important are coming from the area along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the group of forces south managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Dyliivka. And later we got this video published by the Russian sources. In this video we can see how Russians raised their flag in the central part of the northern Dyliivka, which means that this village was secured completely. Based on the report of the Minister of Defense and the video that was published we're taking a look at, we have adjusted the map and we have colored all these territories in Russian favor. So as we can see, the first task of the Russian forces along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal was completed. And now the Russians are going to move further along the railways in the direction of Alexandra Shultine, and the Russians are going to continue offensive operation further in the direction of Bilagora. Furthermore, we expect that a turning point in the Battle of Pritiechno is going to happen very soon, and this will allow the Russians to continue their offensive operation in the southern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Alexandra Shultine and Bilagora from behind. So we see that the situation here remains tense, and most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area in the very near future. Now we are taking a look at the video that took place in the southeastern part of the city of Konstantinovka. In this video we could see how the Russians began bombing and attacking the southeastern part of the city of Konstantinovka with artillery, and this is probably the first video of this type. We used to get videos of Russian FPV drone attacks, and this is the first video of artillery strike. Maybe not the first one, but we see that the Russians are able to bomb the city of Konstantinovka with artillery, which means that the Russians are very, very close to this city. When talking about the Kleban-Byksky pockets, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. The only interesting thing is this concentration of Russian FPV drone attacks. we continue receiving more and more proofs, more and more videos that Ukrainians are trying to slowly but step by step to evacuate their soldiers from the most southern part of this pocket. Nobody wants to stay in the southern part of the pocket, because there are too high chances of being encircled by the Russians. So that is why the Ukrainians are trying to stick as close as possible to the main evacuation routes, and we are waiting for the beginning of the Russian offensive. As for now, the Russians are working just with drones in this area, but soon we expect the operation on the ground. Now let's talk about the situation along N32 road. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions along the main supply lines between the Pokrovsk agglomeration and the settlement of Druzhkovka with ground drones. So the thing is that the Russians currently are able to produce much more drones that they need to attack deep inside and all over the entire territory of Ukraine. For example, on this matter, we got lots of very interesting statements and articles that were published by pro-Ukrainian sources. The Russian Federation can launch 700 drones per day as early as September, and this is a very huge number. So this situation forced the Russians to use this type of drones not just to attack the western part of Ukraine or the city of Kiev or any other settlement in the central part for several hundred kilometers from the line of combat contact. This situation allows the Russians to use drones along the line of combat contact like this one. In this video, and this is not the first video, during the previous 5 days we got 5 or 4 videos how the Russians were attacking exactly this area with ground drones, how the Russians were destroying bridges, ammo depots, temporary deployment point. These drones have very powerful warhead, which allows the Russians to reduce fortifications to ruins in a very short period of time. So now we see that the Russians are over-concentrated in this area, and obviously they are going to move here. They are going to attack this territory in the very near future. As for the previous 24 hours, the pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians first of all managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement of Novoserhiivka by taking under control the anti-tank ditches and company stronghold in this area, and the Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlement of Novoserhiivka, which is obviously the primary target for the armed force of the Russian Federation. Now let's talk about the Dnipropetrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians secured the village of Novoserhiivka, which is located to the south of the settlement of Udachne. In this video, we can see how Russian soldiers were fighting for the territory of the settlement and how the Russians during this video raised another flag in this area. So based on this video, we came to a conclusion that the village of Novoserhiivka was secured by the Russians. Furthermore, during this video, we can see how Russian stormtroopers were moving from one building to another, trying to clear these territories from Ukrainian soldiers. And telling the truth, during the day, we expected that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation would confirm Russian control over this territory, but most likely the Russians decided to hold this information until the next day. Anyway, the village was secured, and as we discussed in the previous videos, now the Russians are not they're not doing anything with the purpose to cross the border between the region of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk region. So the Russians are focused to secure the Dnipro region itself, Donetsk region itself, without entering Dnipropetrovsk region. As for this operation, as for this direction, we see that now the Russians are planning to move further in the northern direction with the purpose to establish and secure the villages of Malodonetska and the settlement of Udachne, with the purpose to outflank the Udachne and to attack Ukrainians from behind. So these two villages are very important because control over this territory will open the Russians a window of opportunities to move further in the northern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Sergeyevka. If somehow the Russians are able to secure, let's say, these territories, this is going to be the beginning of complete disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. And according to all these updates, it seems that this is exactly what the Russians are trying to do right now. As for the Novopavlovka direction, currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Yalta. According to information we have, the Russians answered the village from the southeast. This information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources and by neutral mappers. As for the end of the 23rd of June of 2025, we got just this video. And in this video we can see how Russians destroyed the temporary deployment point on this most southeastern part of the settlement. And probably as a result of FAB attack, or maybe Russian soldiers managed to bring some explosive very close to this position, and today we see that the Russians secured this territory. So most likely a turning point in the battle for this village was probably walked through by the Russians, and now the Russians are going to move further. As for the Zaporizhzhia direction and the South Donetsk direction, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Shevchenka. The Ukrainians are trying to bring more forces to the line of combat contact, but the Russians establish complete FPV drone control over these fields, and they destroy everything they see that is trying to get as close as possible to the settlement. According to the Telegram channels that has affiliations with the Group of Forces East, currently the Russians are trying to advance in the northwestern direction and to establish complete control over the villages of Voskresenka, Maliivka and Shevchenka. The sources reported that Ukrainians have already abandoned their positions in these fields and were forced to fall back further in the western direction. So according to several sources, all these territories could be colored in the Russian favor in the very near future. As for the Zaporizhzhia direction, we have no changes on the ground, but we have lots of very interesting videos from the settlement of Stepnogorsk and from the entire western Zaporizhzhia direction. In this video, we can see how Russians were pummeling this area, how the Russians were reducing Ukraine positions to ruins. A lot of artillery strikes, a lot of FAB strikes, a lot of multiple launch rocket attacks, a lot of flamethrower strikes. So it seems that it's not just something like a regular attack, it seems that this is like the artillery preparation before the beginning of another offensive. So according to all these icons, we believe that the Russians may try to attack in the northern direction, at least with the purpose to secure the village of Kamenska and to maintain the line along the villages of Plavny, Kamenska and the settlement of Stepova. This will allow the Russians to begin the siege of the village of Stepnogorsk, which opens the gates to the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kherson direction. According to information we have, the Ukrainians are preparing something in this area, and it seems that the Ukrainians are planning to land infantry in this area in the very near future. During the previous 24 hours, very interesting video was published by the Ukrainian sources. In this video, we can see how Russians probably were carrying out something like military exercises with the purpose to land infantry along the Kinburn Spit, along this Gulf of Tendra and the Tendra Spit. And the Russians were practicing in these probably military maneuvers, and Ukrainians attack Russian boats with the use of a Bayraktar drone. So, and this is not the only video from this area. Several days ago we got video somewhere on the 15th or 17th of June, how the Russians at the same area discovered the movements of Ukrainian boat with infantry, with soldiers, and Ukrainians were planning to land their infantry also on the territory of Tendra Spit, but the Russians destroyed them also with drone. So it seemed that the Ukrainians have some plans. The Ukrainians are preparing themselves before the beginning of another special operation that we saw with Russian strategic aviation, and it seems that Ukrainians are planning and are going to land infantry exactly in this area, and something tells me that this might happen very, very soon. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.